Today, we're going to dive into the very idea of identity. We tend to think of ourselves as these unique individuals, right? But what if the most fundamental parts of who we are aren't actually found inside us at all?
So let me ask you a question, straight up. Who are you? It seems pretty simple, doesn't it? You've probably got an answer ready to go, but just hang on a second. Let's really think about that.
You know, most of us are taught to look inward for the answer, to our private thoughts, our memories, our one-of-a-kind personality. But what if the most important parts of your identity aren't actually located inside your head? What if they're somewhere else entirely?
The philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah puts it like this. He argues that our core identities, being a man, a woman, an American, an Asian, they're all built on ideas we almost never stop to question. And he suggests that maybe those foundations, the very concept of what a self even is, might not be as solid as we'd like to believe.
And this idea leads us to a really fascinating discovery from the social sciences. It turns out that while we might think the idea of a self is universal, it's really not. How people define their own existence can change, and I mean dramatically, depending on where they are in the world.
The idea of an independent, self-contained individual, which, let's be honest, many of us just take for granted, is just one possible way to see things. Researchers like Hazel Rose Marcus and Shinobu Kitayama have shown there's another, equally powerful way to see the self, a view they call interdependent.
So let's look at how different these two views are. The independent self, which is pretty common in many Western cultures, is seen as this unique, separate entity. Your actions come from what's inside you. But the interdependent self? It's fundamentally part of a social web. Your actions are all about responding to others in that web. So it's a real clash between me as the primary unit versus the group as the primary unit.
Now, this isn't just some abstract theory, not at all. To see how these two ways of seeing the self can collide in the real world with huge consequences, we're going to look at a really powerful historical example from New Zealand.
So here's the quick history. You have the indigenous Maori people, and then the British settlers, known as the Pākehā. For over a century, they lived together, and New Zealand even kind of billed itself as this model of racial harmony. But that harmony, it was mostly an illusion. And that illusion eventually shattered over these deep, bitter disagreements about land, justice, and responsibility.
And this wasn't just a political fight or an economic one. No, at its very core, this was a philosophical clash. It was a collision between two profoundly different ways of understanding what a self is and where it even comes from.
To really get what was happening here, we need to take a closer look at the Maori perspective. It's a worldview that's built on a concept called the kinship self.
So in this worldview, your true essential self isn't actually you, the individual with a specific body and brain. No, your real self is the larger group, the family, the kin. And that self, the kinship self, it doesn't die when one person does. It just keeps going.
Now, of course, they understand physical individuality. They get that my pain isn't your pain. But the significance of life, the meaning behind everything you do and experience, that can only be understood in collective terms.
And this has absolutely massive real-world consequences. I mean, think about it. If one person commits an offense, the whole family might be held responsible. If one person is harmed, the entire group feels that harm and might seek revenge, or utu, not just against the individual, but against any member of the other group. The individual exists to serve the collective. Full stop.
So from this kinship perspective, the typical Western idea that the group is there to serve the individual, well, that's not just seen as wrong. It's seen as utter and dangerous nonsense. The two worldviews are completely inverted.
Okay, so what does this incredible story from New Zealand really teach us about our own identities, no matter where we live? Well, it pushes us to ask a much bigger question. Because identities, they aren't static. They're not frozen in time. In New Zealand today, these two very different ideas of the self aren't in separate boxes anymore. They become intertwined, tangled up, each one influencing the other.
And that dynamic, it reveals a much deeper truth for all of us. This whole idea of personal identity, it isn't just a solo journey to figure out who I am. It's actually a collective process of figuring out who we are and which we really belong to.
And here is the final twist in all of this. Even that very idea of being a lone, independent individual, well, that itself is a collective story. It's an identity handed to us by a group, a culture that believes in individualism. So you see, there's really no escaping the we.
So take a second and think about your own identity.
Think about your family, your nation, your profession, your friends. If you really are a collection of all the groups you belong to, which one of them tells your truest story?